So welcome back to the 19th edition of the Ohio Bass Podcast. I'm your host, Nick. You can follow me on Twitter at Ohio_Bass, Instagram at Ohio_Bass_outdoors, TikTok and Snapchat at Ohio_Bass, or you can email the show at the Ohio Bass Podcast at gmail.com. I'm happy to report that we are back streaming on every platform except for Audacity. I know radio.com got bought out by Audacity, so I'm going through the process of getting it back on there, but we are on Google Podcasts, we are on Pandora, we are on iHeartRadio, Spotify, so it's pretty easy to find us. If you want to recommend us to a friend, if you just type in the Ohio_Bass Podcast on Google, you'll find all kinds of different platforms. We're even going to start uploading episodes to YouTube, so you can find us there. This week, no good take, bad take. I have an awesome interview. I was able to catch up with Jared_Outdoors on Instagram. The guy is absolutely crushing it. Definitely recommend following him there. We talk about steelhead fishing. I'd love to bring him back on to go in more depth about actual more advanced techniques with steelhead. Steelhead is a fascinating fish. I'm not going to give away the whole interview yet, but one thing that we talked about was in the beginning how hard it is to make that next step. How many times you have to go out and strike out. How many times you get skunked. How many things that you learn in the process of growing as an angler in steelhead fishing, which is amazing because the last 3 years I've been learning how to do this. I've been having a really hard time. I'm not used to going out and not catching any fish. You know, since a kid, I've been learning about fishing for bass. It's been like engraved in my mind how to catch bass. I go out, I look at the water, I instantly know what to use, I know where to go. Steelhead fishing is completely different. It's all new to me. And I go out, I strike out, I see other anglers strike out, it's cold, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Is it my bait? Is it my line? Is it my location? Is it the water? Is it the time of year? Am I not tipping the bait? Should I have used this instead? So to circle back around to my original point, he said it took him years to figure out how to consistently land steelhead. And it's been taking me years too. And that was kind of reassuring to know that, you know, there is a process and the payout is totally worth it if you go through the grind of learning and learning. So definitely stick around for that interview. Yeah, really, really awesome stuff. So I want to bring up real quick, if you live in or around Ohio, the Columbus Fishing Expo is coming up February 10th, 11th, and 12th. It's always an awesome show. I go every year. You can get tickets online for $12. Hundreds of different vendors. Some of my favorites, Brush Pile Fishing, will be there. I always like talking to Russ. He's a really awesome, down-to-earth guy. Great TV show, one-time supporter of GoPro Lures. Definitely going to stop by his booth. Fish USA will be there. America's Tackle Shop. I met the marketing and pro staff director at a show, I think 4 years ago. They were really awesome people. Picked up a hoodie. Always represent Fish USA. A lot of local guys too. Psycho Fishing Lures will be there. Scott Wilson, he's a friend of mine. I met him on Twitter. He always has a booth. He has awesome crankbaits, mega bass crankbaits. He hand paints them himself. I think they're $10 at the show. I mean, it's a steal. So definitely stop by his booth. And then St. Croix Rods will be there. And I know they always have show specials. I got to walk into that place with a budget. And another great thing is, if you look at the vendor list and you don't see a company that you were hoping was going to be there, there are so many different tackle shops that they're probably going to be carrying the brands that you were looking for. It happened to me last year. That's how I found Whisker Seeker Rods. So they also have a lot of good things for kids. A lot of games, casting contests. They give away a lot of swag, good food. It's really a good family time. It's super cheap. So I definitely recommend heading to the Columbus Fishing Expo February 10th, 11th, or 12th. All right, so no product review this week. I do want to do a quick shout out to a company called First Contact. They make tungsten weights for every application. Recently, they've been added to Tackle Warehouse, which is awesome. If you like to support startup companies like me, definitely check out First Contact Weights at tacklewarehouse.com. All right, so that's about all I have for an open. We're going to get right to the interview. I do want to apologize. Now, I did upgrade my software and hardware and microphone, but I'm still struggling with how to record phone interviews. It's not possible for me to be able to interview everybody in person, obviously. Typically, people are states or countries away. So if you have any ideas, if you have a podcast, or if you're in the business, if you're in radio, and you know maybe software or some sort of technology where I can record better quality phone conversations so I can upload it to the podcast, I will appreciate it if you email me at theohiobasspodcast@gmail.com.
Yes, sir!
I will definitely make it worth your while. I will mail you an awesome thank you package full of baits. So hit me up on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, email the show. So with that being said, let's hit it. All right, let's head to the hotline presented by Deeper Sonar. Head to deepersonar.com to pick up your trophy bundle. So today I'm super excited to have a conversation with somebody that's been absolutely crushing it. You can find him on Instagram and TikTok at jrod_outdoors. Jared, how are you doing, my friend?
I am doing great. How are you, Nick?
I'm doing great. I really appreciate you coming on. This is really exciting. The main goal of this podcast is to have people on like you from around the world to share techniques and experiences in fishing and to help other people learn. And you're actually the first person from Ohio on the podcast, which is pretty awesome. So what I like to do in the beginning is maybe people are not familiar with you or follow you on Instagram. So can you give us like a little background about how you grew up fishing, where you're from, and I'll just kind of leave it open-ended for you.
Gotcha. Sounds good. So my name's Jared. I'm obsessed with the outdoors, specializing in fishing, but I do it all. Hunting all the way down to fishing, you name it. It's a good chance I do it. And there's nothing else I'd rather be doing. I grew up in a little town outside of Cleveland. I'm sure you've heard of it, called Parma Heights.
Yes.
Lived there all my life, and it's kind of really nice because I'm 20 minutes from the lake and then 20 minutes from most of the tributaries that I fish a lot. And I live right on the Rocky River, which is one of the most well-known steelhead rivers in Steelhead Alley.
Awesome. So when is the best time of year to go steelhead fishing? From what I know, I think maybe November, December is when we kick it off, and I'm not really sure when it ends.
Yeah, so generally there's no exact set time, but I would say the months that you could start targeting them effectively would be October. Okay. That's normally when I start, and then you can catch them all the way from October all the way up into May. May's pushing it. Okay. But they're hanging around. They're spawning in the rivers all the way up until May. But prime time, I would say, would be any time from October all the way up until May.
Okay, and that's just not localized in Cleveland. That's the whole Great Lakes region?
Correct, yep.
All right. So when you're targeting a new body of water, what are some of the things that you're looking for as far as the water conditions? Like fast current, slow current? Are you looking for a certain depth, a certain temperature, structure?
This all depends. There's a lot that goes into it. So say you're going out in the fall and you're going to fish, we'll say Rocky River, since everyone here may have an idea of that place. Yeah. It's hard to target these steelhead in clear water because they're very smart and they're timid. Yeah. And a lot of people get lockjaw. If they can see you and you can see them, they know what's up, Yeah. So it's always best if there's a little stain to the water, not so much that you can't see, like there's no visibility. Okay. As long as there's a little bit of a tint to the water, the fish will feel more comfortable. Usually after a rain, the rain will disturb all the soil around it, and that'll muddy up the water a little bit, bring in all the bugs and all the food for the fish. It'll drift through the water for them to eat. Okay. So that's the best time. Best time to fish for them would be as the river's rising or as the river is coming down. That's when all the food's going to be washing down the river, and they'll be sitting in their holes where the current's blowing all that food past them.
All right.
And that's a big part of reading the water. Well, say it like this. We're approaching a hole from downriver. You're walking up to it, and there's a tail out, which is going to be what you're walking to the middle, which will be deeper. Then there's the head of the hole where the fastest water is up there. Okay. Most of the time, the fish will either be sitting middle of the hole or the tail out, kind of mid-water column.
Yeah.
Anywhere from the middle of the water column to the bottom is normally where you'll find them.
Okay, that makes sense. So, what are flow charts?
Flow charts are a hidden gem if you know what they are or not. They're public, so it's no secret. It's just not a lot of people know about them. You can look them up. USGS has them. For most of the main rivers have. A lot of the unstocked tributaries will not, so it's a little bit harder, but it all comes with time and learning how to read it. We'll use the rock as an example again.
All right.
The flow chart, it reads in CFS how much, basically, to dumb it down, how much water is pushing through that section of the river at a time. And there's certain times that are best to fish a river according to the CFS. For the Rocky, that would be anywhere from, I'd say, 150 all the way up to 400.
All right.
So CFS is a big factor. You can look that all up on USGS. But another major factor is turbidity of the river, which can also be found on most of the USGS websites. Turbidity is basically how dirty the water is, which plays a huge role. Like I said earlier, if the water looks like mud, you can't see anything. The fish can't see that much food drifting down.
Yeah.
Not the most effective time to target them, although you can still make it happen.
So I always strike out, it seems like, when I go steelhead fishing. And I don't feel too bad because I see a lot of other anglers, they're not really crushing it either. Nobody's really catching anything. And one of the main things I hear all the time on the river is about the water being too low. So is that a common problem?
Yes, that is a very common problem. Like I said, the best time is during a rain usually, when the rivers have a little bit of flow to them. The start of this year, the whole start to this season has kind of been a bummer. Mm-hmm. We almost had a dry spell from October all the way to December, and finally got some of that rain. Right now, all the rivers are completely blown out, which is annoying, because you can't fish them, but it'll bring a lot more fish in. It's just been a slow year, and it seems like it's been happening more and more each year.
Well, according to your Instagram account, it hasn't been a slow year because it looks like you're still crushing it. So a couple months ago, I reached out to you on Instagram and I said, hey, I'm looking at this rod. I'm new to steelhead fishing. What do you think? And you were able to give me some advice on that. And I actually did end up buying that rod. It's an 8'6" St. Croix Triumph. And I got it paired with a 30 size Quantum Smoke. Love it. And I was wondering if I could pick your brain about what kind of rods and reels, I kind of call it hardware. What are some of your go-to setups that you use?
So I have 4 different rods for steelhead, and I'll start with the beginner intro one, which is still effective, but not my preferred way.
Okay.
And like you said, hardware. So that means like crankbaits, spoons, lures, and stuff on a spinning rod,
Yeah.
So I would go anywhere from like a 7 to even 9 foot rod, kind of exactly what you have, what I recommended to you.
Okay.
That's going to be your best bet for throwing spoons, medium heavy normally.
All right.
And all you're going to do is, kind of like fishing for bass almost, just throwing crankbaits around. Not too much has to be said about that. It's pretty simple concept.
Mm-hmm.
Line-wise, for that kind of setup, same thing. I would do anywhere from an 8 to up to 12, 13-pound line even.
All right. Are you thinking braid?
Really, it doesn't matter. The thing with braid is if you're going to be fishing in winter when you're below freezing, braid tends to freeze up a lot more, and it'll freeze up the eyes on your rod, and it'll happen even with mono. Yeah. It's just a game. a way to get around that a little bit is to use mono, and then a little trick that I have is take a little thing of chapstick with you, and on those cold days you can smear some of the chapstick on the top few eyelets of your rod.
Ooh.
It'll help distribute it on the line and melt away some of that ice.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that. That's a cool little trick.
With the casting setup, it's kind of a preference. You can run a leader like you would float fishing wise.
Yeah.
You really don't have to though. I don't think the fish matter as much. See that lure and they think it's a fish and they'll go crush it. So if you're fishing clearer water, it doesn't hurt to have a leader so they don't get spooked by your line. But in my experience, it doesn't matter as much with a casting setup.
Okay.
We'll move on to, I said I had 4 rods, so I have that casting setup. Then I have 2 drift fishing setups, float combos if you want to call them.
Okay.
The center pin, which is kind of the way to go around here, at least if you don't have to, but in my opinion, it's the most effective and it's just fun. It's a center pin reel.
Yeah.
And if a center pin's not for you, you can also look into getting a bait casting reel. Kind of the same idea. Basically, that line just coming off your spool, the current's peeling it off for you.
Yeah.
And it's kind of free moving with the flow of the water. If you want your bait or whatever is on the end of your line, the flow is naturally with the speed as hard as you can. So I have a center pin and I have a bait caster. My center pin is an Okuma Sheffield DR2.
All right.
Which is an interesting center pin because it actually has a drag system on it, which is almost unheard of in the center pin world. I don't use it. I'll use it if I'm using the center pin for like carp or something in the winter or the summer, my bad. But for steelhead, I think it kind of takes the fun out of the whole idea of a center pin.
Yeah.
The one thing I will say about center pins is they are tricky to learn. It took me about 2 months to get it down good.
Yeah.
So if you're not going the route of a center pin, I would say get a bait caster because most people also know how to use that. I have a Shimano SLX DC paired up with a Nova tackle rod. It's a spiral wrapped float rod. I believe it's an 11'6". I think it's a 6 to 12 pound range rod, and it's a bait casting rod. It's a great setup. I love it. And it's nice because with a center pin in the winter when it's cold out, the reel is just solid metal and your hand's just on direct contact with that all day. So your hand kind of freezes up pretty bad.
Yeah.
With the bait caster, it's easier. You can wear gloves. Some reels are plastic, not as cold. That's one of the big factors that led me into getting a bait casting setup was so I didn't freeze that much on the real cold days.
So do you find it difficult to float fish with a spinning rod? Because I would think if you opened up the bail, it would flow pretty well.
So when I first started getting into it, like most people would, I used my spinning rod, and I still keep it around. I'll use it sometimes. It is kind of tougher because you got to keep maneuvering your bail open and closed. But It is how people learn how to do it, which is almost why I would say if you're really wanting to get into steelhead, would say just go straight for a center pin or a bait caster because you can get a much more better drift with one of those reels compared to a spinning reel. That leads me on to the next method or so. So we covered casting lures. Now we're on float fishing. So I described the center pin and the bait casting combos that I had. Mm-hmm. For those who don't know, float fishing is the most effective way to target trout species, steelhead. All you're doing is you have a float, and then you'll have a couple weight underneath that float to a leader. Then you'll have that leader that goes to a hook to a bait of your choice. Basically, the main bait-wise around here is spawn sacks or beads. Okay. Which resembles eggs because those trout are coming in from the Great Lakes, Lake Erie in our case, to spawn in the rivers. And they're eating all the eggs that are floating down from the other fish. Yeah. That's basically what they're eating in there. But they'll eat anything from, bugs, beads, all kinds of things, lures. You can really get pretty crazy with it once you get it down. But the most effective way is by far spawn sacks, I would say. And we'll get into that eventually. You can get into tying your own bait. There's a whole other world to it once you learn how to catch them.
All right, so that kind of leads me up to my next question about different techniques. So when I first started fishing for steelhead, I'll give a shout out to my friend Case Yardam at City Anglers. I went up to Canada, and they were only using beads. Sometimes they had spawn sacks, but it was mostly beads. When I came back here, the beads were not working. And I reached out to him, and he said, well, beads are typically used with, really fast current. If you have still water, like where I'm fishing in Sandusky, you should probably float some flies. So can you give us some advice on different techniques, different baits that you use?
So I'll start off the season using mostly spawn sacks when the fish are just starting to come in, because they will always accept a fresh spawn sack. It's hard for them to turn that down.
Yeah.
You can always pair the spawn sack with a bead up above your hook, which is what I'll do, especially in some dirtier water.
Yeah.
I'll put a brighter bead above my spawn sack, and that'll just help the fish kind of pick it out more. Sometimes it's not needed, but it doesn't hurt to try it. Bead-wise, I would say if you're going to run a solo bead, the best time of year to do that would be the spring run, when most of these fish are spawning and all those eggs are floating down the river.
Yeah.
They are punching on all those loose eggs floating down. They see a bead floating down, they think it's an egg, and they're going to take it. The biggest thing, I think, in my opinion, steelhead fishing wise, because it is tough. Like you said, it took you a few years to even catch one.
Yeah.
It took me a little over 4 years to get it down. I probably caught 2 within that 4-year span, and it was so frustrating because I would see people catching them all the time. Best thing you can do is use social media to your advantage. Look up YouTube. And don't be afraid to talk to other guys on the river. A lot of my best buddies now that I fish with every day, I met just talking to on the river, and ever since it was history. Don't be afraid to talk to people. If you see someone catch one, there's a good chance he'll offer you some tips, if not even give you a rig to set up, There's a lot of guys in our community.
So that actually happened to me. One of the first times I went to Sandusky, I met a really cool guy, and he gave me a lot of advice. He was really helpful, and he was tipping his flies with maggots, which is something that was completely new to me. Is that something that you ever do?
I used to do that a lot, and I'm not saying it's bad. It's definitely a great way to catch them. You can tip anything with them, really. The main thing would be a jig tipped with maggots. But if you throw a maggot on anything, it doesn't hurt. It just adds some more food for them. Looking back on it now, I have a lot of experience in it.
Yeah.
And some other guys will say this too. Maggots really, it's kind of a pain in the butt because you have to pay for them and you got to keep them alive. They die pretty quick. Gulp makes those fake maggot things, and really you could just buy those and not have to worry about, crushing even the maggot container in your bag or whatnot. So I would say just buy one of the Gulp things, man, because those even hold a lot of scent, and I don't see any difference between the fake ones and the live ones.
Yeah, his name was Kevin Billings, and I want to give him a shout out. He did pass away, but he was a really awesome guy. I met him, I became friends with him on Facebook, and I fished with him quite a few times. So, yeah, he was definitely an awesome guy. I miss him.
Never met him, but I heard a lot about him.
Yeah, actually, the first time I met him, I pulled up next to his Jeep, and I was like, man, this guy has more fishing stickers on the back of his Jeep than I have on the back of my Jeep. So he had instant credibility with me.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things about him. It's a shame that he passed away. He was a great guy from what I heard.
So what do you think about scent? Do you think steelhead use scent to help them target in on food?
I'm a firm believer that they do. When they can't rely on their eyesight, say in water when they can't see as well, I believe scent is a huge factor. They make all these kind of, garlic scents, dips that you could dip your preferred bait of choice in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll carry that around with me for muddy water days.
Yeah.
I believe it just helps the fish find it a little bit more. There's a point where you can get too technical with the stuff you use, and I used to be one of the guys that had to carry everything in my pack. My bag weighed like 30 pounds one time, and I was like, just ridiculous. My back. Now I only carry the essentials. I can fit everything into like a little chest pack even. Because with steelhead, you're going to be hiking a lot normally, and you want to just carry the least amount of stuff with you as possible.
Yeah.
If you really wanted to get simple with it, just carry a jar of spawn sacks and a couple floats and a hook. That's really all you need,
So that actually leads me up to my next question. If you're going to put together a beginner's kit, not everybody can afford to buy everything at the same time in the beginning. So what would be some key items, some key lures that you would recommend somebody just starting out to get first?
So I would definitely, you can head up to any local tackle shop around here. One of my favorites is Erie Outfitters, owned by Craig Lewis. He'll be in there. You can stop and talk to him anytime. He's a great guy. He'll give you everything you need to know. And they sell spawn sacks up there. I've used them before. They work fine. So don't be afraid to go to local tackle shops even and talk to people around there. You'll meet a lot of cool guys there. Bait-wise, though, there's a whole array of things. I was just going through my tackle bag, actually, before this, so I get some ideas. And on the table in front of me, I got the classic Cumbo Fishing crappie tube, which will always work. Look up Cumbo Fishing USA on YouTube. You can learn a lot from him using the crappie tube. He's a cool guy.
All right.
A lot of plastics, a lot of soft plastics will work. Anything from like little tiny crappie, Mr. Twister things, to the gulp minnows even, and plastic worms too are another big thing. I got all kinds of plastic worms in here. You really can get kind of crazy with some of the things that you use. As long as you're drifting that bait naturally in the current and it's where the fish are, there's a chance to lead it.
So, do you ever twitch those baits, or do you just kind of let it, flow with the current?
When it's warm out, I'll twitch them more. But say you're in the dead of winter and a lot of things are going to be cold, hibernating wise, you can take a jig and drift it in the middle of winter. And there's a term called dead drifting, which is when you're not touching, you're not letting your bobber move or anything. You're just letting it flow. Yeah. You're not doing any special effects to it. And that can be very effective sometimes.
Yeah, and that's actually what I do the most is float fish. So where I go, I can see the steelhead just sitting there. And what happens for me is when I float the bait by them, they just sit there and look at it. And I don't know what I'm doing wrong, if I need to switch the bait. Is it too big, too small? Is it the wrong color?
Like I said, a lot of times if you can see them pretty good, they can see you even better.
All right.
And they're not dumb, they're smart fish.
Yeah.
So when that happens, I'll usually walk away from the hole and approach them from a different angle, preferably downstream, so you're not causing a ruckus stirring up dirt upstream.
Okay.
And just try to be stealthy, especially in clear water. Act like you're on a hunt for a deer. You don't want to spook that deer. You want to sneak up on them. I would approach those fish from downstream and cast up above them a good ways and let that bait just drift down through them. And sometimes with steelhead, they're a tricky fish. A lot of people struggle with them. I struggled with them for a lot of years before I really got it down.
So yeah, it definitely makes sense and good information. I mentioned in the open that you are a multi-species angler. So is steelhead your favorite fish? Do you have like a second, third, fourth favorite fish to target?
It's hard for me to pick a favorite just because I love it all, I could target creek chubs all day and have just as fun as I would catching a tarpon,
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. And I see that you catch a lot of carp, and I love that. I love fishing for carp. I am one of the few people that I see actually try to catch carp on purpose.
Yeah. So to me, there's no such thing as a trash fish, Even though they may be invasive, they're here to stay. You can't get rid of them, so you might as well embrace them.
So another thing I saw, which is super interesting to me, is that you're actually going out at nighttime and catching steelhead.
Yeah, so that's it's not unheard of, but it's definitely not the normal thing to do, I would say. It's kind of a pain in the butt. I'm not going to lie at night, especially in the colder months.
Oh, I bet.
You're fishing in the dark. It's hard to see things, hard to tie, and your hands are cold. So if you don't get a bite within like first hour or two, you're like, all right, I'm ready to go home. Basically, what I'll do at night is I'll target them the same way I would as during the day, same places, same type of runs, all that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll use a glow bobber. They make glow bobbers. You can do that, or you can get a zip tie, even zip tie a glow stick to your bobber if you really wanted to.
Okay.
And they make glow beads, all kinds of glow baits, really. Glow worms, glow beads, you name it. There's a good chance they have it out there. Anything that glows, really, you can purchase a UV light with it to charge that bait up, make it shine real good, and drift it through. Sometimes, though, you don't even need anything that glows. They'll still eat eggs perfectly fine in the night, They have really good vision, and they can see pretty damn well with even the moonlight.
So, do you think they behave differently at nighttime than they do during the day?
I believe I'm going to say that they move around more at night just because they're more comfortable. Okay. But it all depends on flows, too. If the river's high during the day, they're obviously going to be moving more than they would at night if the river's lower. But basically, you're going to fish the same things that you would during the day. They're going to be holding up in some of the more well-known areas,
So I kind of want to sneak this in real quick. I'm going to pick up my first pair of waders. And I'm not really sure, are there cold water waders? Or are they universal and then you just layer up underneath a regular pair of waders? And I'm also conflicted on whether I should buy the ones with the built-in boots or not.
Okay, so when I first started getting into the steelheading scene, I had the hunting waders, the $100 Cabela insulated hunting waders. And there's nothing wrong with those. They're the cheaper option. Yeah. They keep you warm. They do everything they need you to do. And there's no shame in wearing them. I still wear mine when it's super cold out, Okay. So I rocked those for about the first 5 years, actually. And I have no complaints, whatever makes you happy. You don't need top-notch gear to catch these fish like a lot of people think you do, Yeah. After I started getting more serious into it, I got my center pin. I started falling in love with it more. Learning a lot more stuff. I made the switch to, they're called breathable waders, which are the ones that have the boot on them. So you'll have to buy the separate boots and then the weight. And I will say that I am now a bigger fan of the breathable waders. Okay. Because there's more breathing room in them. You're not confined to a big, heavy set pair of hunting waders, especially like, for me, I can't sit in a hole all day. It's all about the adventure for me. So I'll walk miles on end through a river or a creek. And the lighter option and waders was the way for me to go. So I bought a pair of drift waders, which is a great brand. But you really, Orvis, Sims, Drift, there's a couple other bigger name brands work. They're all really good. I will say this, though. The breathable waders are a bit more on the pricey end compared to the old school hunting waders. So if you're looking to start out into steelheading, I would go with the hunting waders and a cheaper rod setup just until you get your head in the game and you learn how to start catching them, So
before I started fishing for steelhead, I always had the mindset of I would rather take my tackle and just throw it in the river than actually try to fish a river because I hate dealing with the current. The water is always dirty. It's littered with snags. I lose so much tackle. Are there any other species of fish that you fish for in a river other than steelhead and trout?
Like I said earlier, I target all the fish. The multi-species is the way I go. There's obviously better times of year to target certain species of fish. Right now, the main thing's steelhead, obviously. Yeah. So when steelhead season is around, I really won't target much else just because I'm out all the time doing that. But here, when the spring run comes and things start warming up, the spring run fish will come in. The steelhead will come in. There'll be a lot more fresh ones in the rivers. A lot of spawning going on. Okay. But the suckers will also start to come in the rivers to spawn. which a lot of people look on as a pain in the ass because, you know, you can sit in a hole for a couple hours and catch 50 suckers and maybe 2 or 3 steelhead. You got to weed through them. But I look on it as it's kind of cool. You know, you can catch all these different kind of suckers. There's white suckers. There's red horse species, which are another type of sucker, but they're actually very cool looking if you look into them. And they're neat fish.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about them, this is a kind of a hidden trick that I use. Not a lot of people use it. Just like with the steelhead, you know, you catch a hen steelhead that has a bunch of eggs, you take it home and use her eggs for bait. You can do the same exact thing with the suckers, you know. They got eggs in them too. So I'll be on the river and I'll have like 2 suckers along with 2 steelhead on my stringer coming home for eggs, and people look at me like I'm crazy. They're like, "What are you doing with those suckers?" I'm like, "I use them for bait. You tie them up with the eggs." So I'll mix the steelhead eggs and the sucker eggs in the spawn sacks during the spring, because those steelhead are also eating the sucker eggs that are floating down, you know?
So I actually have a quick story about trash fish. My friend Case Yardom caught a world record carp on accident fishing for trout up in Canada. And we're all sitting around a fire, and one of the guys was kind of like busting his balls a little bit. And he said, "The only reason you have the world record carp is because you're the only person that take the time to weigh one." And I thought that was just really funny.
Yeah.
I was like, man,
that's the whole stereotype with the trash fish thing, you know?
Yeah, they're giving them hell for that.
You know, if you're one of the guys that likes sport fish, there's nothing wrong with it, but you know, don't hate on other guys who don't, you know, enjoy catching everything.
So every guest, I do a little segment called Rapid Fire. And typically I talk to like bass fishermen, but I guess we can just do this universally. So the first question would be, if you had a preference, would you pick a spinning, bait caster, or center pin reel?
For all kinds of fishing?
Yeah.
Probably a spinning rod, just because you can do pretty much everything with it.
All right. Second question. So you're going to walk down to a lake that you've never fished before, and you can only take 3 baits. Which 3 baits would you take?
Well, number 1, which is a no-brainer for me, would be live bait. You just can't go wrong with it. You know, that's what every fish is naturally. They can't turn it down.
Yeah.
So number 1 is always going to be live bait. Always has been, always will be. Number 2, can't go wrong with the little rooster tail, you know? That's another one of my all-time classic favorite baits. And then I would say number 3 would probably be some type of plastic swim bait. Because you can do a lot with that. You could put it on a bare hook and act like it's a bait fish, or you could put it on a jig head. You could fish the bottom. You could drop shot it. You know, you could do all kinds of things with it.
All right. The next one here, if you had a preference, would you rather fish in a lake, river, pond, or ocean?
That's a tough one because I don't do too much ocean fishing, and I know that I would love it, say, if I lived around the ocean.
Yeah.
But for me, it's all about the rivers. It's all about the adventure, the hikes, the scenery. And with rivers, you know, the holes are constantly changing.
Yeah.
You got to search. You got to hunt down the fish. It's all about the adventure and exploration.
Awesome. All right. Braid, mono, or fluoro? Okay,
so for steelhead, I would go mono mainline, and then there's a lot of guys talking about your leader if you want to use fluoro or mono.
Mm-hmm.
And I really don't think it matters that much. I use both.
Yeah.
I've used them in clear water. What it really comes down to is presenting your bait. That's the biggest thing.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much what your bait is presenting it. You want that bait to drift as naturally as possible and in the strike zone.
All right. So this is one of my favorite questions. What is one thing that you always take fishing with you that is not tackle related?
So I fish until dark a lot, so I will always carry a flashlight with me just in case.
All right.
I take my speaker with me a lot because I like to listen to music while I'm out there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I always got some river snacks with me. beef jerky, venison jerky, all kinds of things.
Nice.
A lot of times, sunflower seeds. I'll eat a whole bag of sunflower seeds while I'm out on the river.
All right, last one here. Do you have a fishing tip that you've learned out on the water that might help people, something that they can't find in like a Bassmaster magazine or somewhere on the internet? Just like a secret tip that you've learned from over the years.
Learn to enjoy the experience, even when you get skunked. Just be glad that you're outside. Just make the most of it every time you go out. And every time you're out, if you enjoy it, you'll pick up on little things here and there. You'll notice how the river rises. You'll see a stick poking out of the water.
Yeah.
And you'll notice 10 minutes later that it's underwater. And you're like, okay, the river rose that much in that amount of time.
Yeah. And
just with the amount of time you spend out there, you'll start to pick up on things like that. And you'll learn how to play the wind, play the weather. You'll learn how the fish thrive, and you can really just nail it down. Pay attention to all the little things, like the bugs that are crawling around the river, that's what the fish are eating. What kind of big fish live there,
Awesome. So where can everybody find you? I know you're on Instagram at jrod_outdoors. Are you on any other platforms? Like, how can our audience get a hold of you?
Yeah, so Instagram's kind of like my main thing right now. It's just jrod_outdoors. But I'm also on FishBrain. It's the same exact name on all my accounts. So just JRod Outdoors on FishBrain too. And then I also have a TikTok, which I'm starting to get more into. I think it's kind of fun.
Yeah, I just started a TikTok a couple months ago, and Deeper Sunner asked me to join their TikTok team. That was the only reason I signed up. It's not as bad as I thought. You have any shout outs? Do you have any companies that you like or help represent? Anybody you want to give a plug to?
I'll shout out some of the local brands around here, some of the great guys. I gotta think here for a minute. Some of the baits that I use, we'll start with the beads. River Row Tackle Co. Barney, look him up. He's on Instagram. He's on Facebook. He started this business a couple years ago. He makes soft beads, and he's growing pretty fast, and he makes some killer soft beads. I will say I use them a lot. So definitely give him a check. Go hit all of the local tackle shops around here. You can look into them all. A lot of great guys, learn a lot. Go check out Erie Outfitters, the Backpackers Shop, Chagrin River Outfitters. Give Cuyahoga River Outfitters a search on the web. And there's a lot more. There's probably a bunch that are slipping my mind just because I can't think right now.
Yeah, well, I see you always rep Cleveland Fishing Company, which is awesome.
Cleveland Fishing Co. They're a clothing brand. I love them. They support our fisheries. They're great guys.
Yeah.
They make awesome clothing too. So if you fish around Cleveland or Ohio, check out Cleveland Fishing Co. Pick up a hat or a shirt or even a sticker for your truck.
Yeah, so I've never met the owner in person, but I have talked to him on the phone a couple times, and I actually started their Twitter account a few years ago and ran that for a while. So definitely love them. I love how they tie in the local sports with fishing in Cleveland area. I always represent Cleveland when I leave the state, when I go visit other places on vacation and stuff like that. So they are an awesome company.
Yep. So Brian's actually the head of operations over there. He's a great guy.
So we're running out of time, so I'm going to wrap this up. I want to thank you for coming on. I think you did an awesome job. There's been people I interviewed in the past that were so bad that I actually never put that interview on a podcast. So I think you did a great job. I'd love to have you back on again. Maybe in a couple months, we can recap steelhead fishing. Even next time too, we could get a little skit going so we could really get in depth about some of the things, because I felt like I was all over the place just explaining this and that. But if you ever have me back on, we could really get in depth about some of the things. So yeah, absolutely. And again, this is exactly what we're looking for. I think you helped a lot of people. You certainly helped me just by having this small conversation. So yeah, definitely down the road, we should get back together. Yeah, no problem. And if there's anyone out there watching this or listening
has any questions, don't be afraid to reach out to me on any of my social medias. I'm not mean. I try to help everyone I can.
Yeah, and I can vouch for that because I did message you on Instagram and ask you about a rod a few months ago. So don't hesitate to hit him up. Again, I want to thank you. Let's give a round of applause for JRod_outdoors. Thank you for taking the time, my friend.
Yep, thank you. It was a pleasure.